What if the key to solving our growing water crisis isn't some high tech fix, but lies in something as ancient and elegant as a wetland? And what if the most powerful driver of that solution isn't top down regulation, but local people who care deeply about the land and water they call home? Hey, everybody, I'm Stephen Shower, and welcome to Stories That Sustain Us, where we explore the real life journeys of people who are reshaping our world through the lens of sustainability, resilience, and hope. Today's episode takes us from the heartland of Indiana to the high desert of New Mexico by way of rainy Seattle. Our guest, Stephen Fry, shares how his early love for water and nature took him from a career in economics and law to the front lines of environmental advocacy. From stormwater management in urban neighborhoods to wetlands restoration in rural landscapes, Stephen has learned one key lesson along the way: nature knows best. In this episode, you'll hear how green infrastructure can do more than manage runoff. It can restore ecosystems, inspire communities, and drive innovation in environmental design. We'll talk about Stephen's work with Amigos Bravos, a nonprofit that's been defending New Mexico's waters for over 35 years. From recent legal wins that protect hundreds of miles of rivers to visionary Wetland Jewels program, Stephen shows us what's possible when policy, science, and community come together. Let me tell you just a little bit more about him. Stephen Fry is responsible for leading policy and project development at Amigos Bravos, where he focuses on improving watershed health, protecting vital water sources, and restoring wetlands across New Mexico. He also provides research and technical support and works to expand partnerships with organizations and communities throughout the state. Before joining Amigos Bravos, Stephen worked in Seattle, managing stormwater flows through green infrastructure and protecting nearshore marine ecosystems. He holds a bachelor's in economics from Santa Clara University and a master's in applied international relations from the University of Washington, where he focused on the intersection of wetland protection and economic development. If you've ever wondered how local action can ripple out to global change or how a shift in mindset can shape our environmental future, this is a conversation for you. Let's dive in with Stephen Fry here on Stories That Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. Good morning, Stephen. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining me on Stories Sustain Us. I've been eager to speak with you. I reached out to you a few months ago, and you had your hands full with some legislative work in New Mexico, and the session's over, and you're freed up to talk. So I'm eager to jump into this conversation. Thanks again for joining me.
Yeah, of course.
Well, so before we get into all the amazing work that you're doing with Amigos Bravos, and I want to hear about the session, you'd mentioned off air that you had some wins. So I'm looking forward to hearing what those are. Let's jump into your story first. How did you get to end up working for Amigos Bravos? Where'd you start off? Where's your childhood begin?
Yeah, so I was born in Indiana, and I was raised there until I was about 11 or 12, and I moved to Seattle with my family. And that was kind of like an eye-opening experience. I always say it was like one of the best things that ever happened to me, because I came from like a small Midwestern town, and then right when you're starting to cause some trouble, all of a sudden it was like this whole new world opened up.
Yeah.
And I wound up going to Santa Clara University outside of San Francisco, San Jose area. And I studied economics and philosophy. I thought I was going to be a lawyer for a long time.
Yeah.
But I did some exploration in that front, and I wound up, after some travels after undergrad, in Chicago, Illinois, and I was working in finance. And while I was succeeding, I guess I should say, at that role, I realized soon that it was not for me, and I was not happy. And I wanted to get back to something that made me feel fulfilled and was doing my part in the world. And so I actually just quit that job, and I went back to graduate school, and I went to a program at the University of Washington. And one of the things that I did at that time was I'd like to ask a lot of hypothetical questions of folks. And one of the questions I like to ask was like, if you could go back in time and redo like your education, what would you do? And my answer was always like, I would go back and work on water. And everyone wants to be like a marine biologist. And, I've done a lot of scuba diving in my life. And I was like, I want to work on water. But I did business as my undergrad. And so going back and like redoing all of the prereqs for
Yeah.
science classes wasn't, ideal. But I
Yeah.
thought I could use my skill set to work on water issues and water problems. And so in my graduate program, I really started focusing on water. And I met this woman in like kind of my conversations as I was building out my network. And she introduced me to the concept of blue carbon and
Yeah.
coastal wetlands. And I just immediately latched on to this. And all of my research in that program was focused on the intersection between economic development and wetland conservation and preservation. And so that my whole college experience was focused on wetlands. And I soon realized that the biggest problem in Washington's water supply was too much water and stormwater pollution into our coastal ecosystems.
Yeah.
And so I started working for a nonprofit in the Seattle area focused on stormwater capture using green infrastructure solutions to mitigate stormwater pollution to salmon habitat in the nearshore wetland systems. And so I worked on that for a few years, really found it to be, an exciting area where you're having impact with soil and vegetation. During the COVID epidemic, my wife and I decided that we didn't really want to be in the Seattle area anymore. We needed to change.
Yeah.
And so we drove around the country, mainly all of 2020, living out of our car in the woods. And we somehow ended up in New Mexico. And we'd never been here before, but we came and we were like, let's hang out for a little bit. And everything just kind of kept falling into place. And so we're still here. We still love it. And, one of the interesting things was when we were driving around the country, I was researching water issues in New Mexico. And I came across this podcast. So it's funny that we're doing a podcast today.
Yeah.
My now boss at Amigos Bravos had given one, and I listened to it, and I was like, wow, this organization is doing a lot of good work, and they happen to be based in Taos, New Mexico. And so when we actually got here, I started reaching out, and I was like, hey, I've heard about you guys. I think you're doing really good work. And so that just like started that conversation. And I was very fortunate to get some like consulting work with them.
Yeah.
And then it ultimately led to my position now. So it felt like kind of serendipitous that a podcast started all of it. And that's kind of how I
Absolutely.
ended up where I am now.
Fantastic. Well, let me back you up in time. I definitely want to know a little bit more about that connection and who your boss is and everything that you're working on, because that's fascinating, and I love those serendipitous connections that you talked about. And my wife and I we kind of did it in reverse. We were down in San Antonio, Texas, and during COVID, we were like, it's probably time to go. And post COVID in 22, we kind of did it the other direction. We had never been to Seattle, and we were like, I don't know, let's just go there. And that's where we are now. So we kind of flipped into the country, keeping the balance, I guess.
Yeah.
Let me take you back in time a little bit. So your teenage years in Seattle, and your love for water. Did that start in Indiana? Did that start in Seattle when you got to this big rainy Pacific Northwest area, or when did that connection to water really begin for you?
I have some very early childhood memories of feeling overwhelmed or like stressed out.
Yeah.
And there was this little creek that was in my neighborhood. And I have these memories of riding my bike to that creek and then just sitting on a rock next to the stream and just like, doing what a 10-year-old thinks is meditation, and like just sitting there and experiencing the noise of the water and the peacefulness and like just the calming aspect of it. And that memory is like stuck with me throughout my life. And I think that was like the first, building block, I would say, towards my now career path. And then, of course, Puget Sound. When I moved to Seattle, I think
Yeah.
Puget Sound is one of the coolest ecosystems in the world. And so being exposed to that environment definitely continued to build on that. And then, as I mentioned, after undergrad, I took some time off and did like a gap year. And I did a lot of scuba diving during that year. And I remember, you know, being under the water and having my mind just go blank, and not blank in like in a bad way, but just like calm. Like I wasn't
Yeah.
thinking about anything else. I was just really living
You're
in the
present.
moment.
Yeah.
And that serenity really just like struck me at that time. And I was like, wow, this is a place where I can just be and not bring anxieties or anything else from my life into this moment. And so that was like that serenity is something that I tried to chase. And I would try to find and bring more holistically into my life. And so I would say like those experiences built on each other. Um, and I still find myself just sitting by water and just like letting it relax me. And I just got back from a trip in Morocco actually, where we spent a lot
Oh,
of time
nice.
on the ocean, and I can just sit there for hours.
Yeah.
And so that I think, as here in New Mexico, water is life, and it just seems like it's always been building to where it's somewhere I feel comfortable and something that I want to work on. And I always say, like, if you try and change the whole world, you're not going to change anything. But if you pick something that you're focused on and have the energy for, and then you trust your fellow man to do that in their own right, then we can
Yeah.
all make change.
Yeah.
And so water is just a thing that I feel strongly about. And so
That's your
that's
thing.
where I find myself.
Yeah, right on. I can relate to that and connect. I as you were sharing your early childhood memory, I guess that would have been in Indiana, I'm guessing,
Yeah.
at the age you mentioned. Um, you actually triggered for me a thought I hadn't thought about. God, I can't remember the last time I thought of this memory, but when you mentioned your earliest memory of water, my earliest memory of water popped up in I'm probably was 5 or under. I don't know. I was just a kid, a toddler, and my mom she'd put me like in a little basket on a bicycle, and we would bicycle to this little creek that was not too far away from our home at the time. And I remember just being fascinated with those little water spiders that just kind of glide across the top of the creek. I just remember just staring at those, like, just totally fascinated by that water environment and these little bugs that just seemed to defy what was supposed to happen on water. It's clearly before I understood physics, but um, but that connection to water for me began real early as well, and still is a thing for me in my career path as well. So I appreciate that connection, and thank you for kind of sharing your journey, because it brings up warm memories for me as well. We have something else, I think, that connects our stories. I seem to recall, and maybe I'm imagining this, so if I'm off base, please correct me, but you have soccer in your background also?
Yeah. Yeah, I played soccer my whole life. It was like my number one sport growing up, like
Yeah,
traveled teams and took
right
up
on.
most of my life. And then I played in high school and I played like recreationally in college. And then I still play pickup today. I coached youth teams several times throughout my life. So I'm a big like European soccer fan.
Yeah.
And so
Who's your
it's just
clubs?
I like Chelsea is my
Yeah,
team.
yeah.
Yeah, not our best year, but we're doing all
Not
right.
yeah. They still might win some European silverware.
Yeah.
So I think they should pull out the win there in the final. But yeah, not your best year. But
Yeah.
yeah. Same thing. I grew up playing, and I couldn't tell you what's going on in American football, but I can tell you everything that's going on in England and Germany and Spain and Italy. So
Yeah. It's a beautiful game.
it is. It is.
Yeah, it's something that I've always found myself coming back to. And um, yeah, it was kind of funny. I was offered to be the assistant high school coach here in Taos, and it was the same time that Amigos Bravos offered me the full-time position.
Yeah.
And I kept teasing my wife that I was going to take the assistant coaching job because my dream job is to be like the men's national team coach. And I was like, this is how we start. This is how we
Yeah,
get there.
yeah,
And
yeah.
she was like losing her mind for like a few days. She was like, you've been working for this for so long and you're going to take this other job. And I was just pulling her leg,
You gotta
but
follow your dreams.
yeah, exactly.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that appreciate that little side trip there. I just remembered reading that somewhere about your background, another great, I think, connection between our paths in life. So,
Cool.
um, so I guess tell me, I'm curious also about your work time here in Seattle before the pandemic and before the road trip. 'Cause I want to ask you some questions about that too. But you mentioned you were working on at a nonprofit here, doing some stormwater management work, and your experience in grad school here at UW. You mentioned a term that I would love for you to explain to the audience because not everybody may fully know what that means. They might have heard it, or maybe no one's heard it before. But you mentioned blue carbon as something that grabbed your attention in grad school, given your business background. Can tell us what that is. Explain to somebody and who's a novice at this, or in simple terms, what does that really mean for someone?
Yeah. So, a lot of times we hear about carbon sequestration and how trees and forests are storing a lot of our carbon. Well, blue carbon is the focus on peat and like wetlands, and specifically coastal wetlands. Um, and the idea that that nutrient rich peat soil stores way more carbon than your traditional forest. And a lot of these areas are acting as shoreline protection for our coastal communities. And so, like, the biggest example that most people will know of is like a mangrove forest. And so they're rooting into the soil, and those soils are very deep, very compact, and full of rich nutrients that they've been storing carbon for millennium. But as storm surge happens, those plants are also acting as a barrier, and they kind of dissipate some of that energy as it hits the shoreline. And they also, provide aquatic habitat for fish and other species. And so since I was living in Seattle in a coastal community that experiences storm surge and things like that, it really was interesting for me to think about it as a carbon sink, but also as shoreline stabilization, preventing erosion, preventing storm surge, providing that ecosystem services for habitat. But then they can also serve as a water quality benefit. And so, like in Seattle, we have a lot of stormwater discharge, um, pipes that are discharging from the system so that it doesn't overflow
Yeah.
directly into Puget Sound. And so if you have healthy vegetation near those sites, they can help filter out some of those pollutants. And so, there's green carbon, there's blue carbon, there's brown carbon, and there's black carbon. We don't need to get into all four of them here, but blue carbon is the focus on wetlands and the benefit that they're providing to our ecosystems.
Perfect. I appreciate that. For the audience who may not be familiar with that, just trying to make sure people are sticking with the story. And I had a guest on a few weeks ago who was doing stormwater work in the Chesapeake Bay area
Yeah.
and helping as an interfaith organization, helping congregations figure out how to better manage stormwater on their property, and put in some green infrastructure and different techniques for capturing and cleaning that stormwater runoff. Sounds like you were doing similar work here. Are there any projects that you can point to as something that you worked on here in the Seattle area, or that you were working on, or something that you're proud of accomplishing here before you jumped in the car with your wife and traveled around the country?
Yeah, we built some really cool story maps that illustrated the impact that vegetation can have. And so we were focusing on the urban core, and using like commercial and government buildings mainly, and some private, um, to manage flows onto their site. And so helped create an incentive program so that private landowners would be encouraged to try and capture stormwater. We built a design competition. So HVAC systems, the heating and cooling systems that commercial buildings have,
Yeah.
use a ton of potable water. And so we created this design competition to see if buildings could capture rainwater and then use that water in their HVAC systems. And so we had this whole like design competition for a year. One of the buildings downtown came up with the best design, and so like we awarded them, and then we were really advocating for that kind of technology to be implemented. We also got students from the University of Washington to help redesign. There was a parking garage where all the water that was falling on the parking garage was just being directly routed to the sewer. But there
Dumped. Yeah.
was some landscaping, an old fountain, kind of like some green features at the building adjacent to it, and they were gonna just like destroy or redo all of that vegetation and landscaping. And so I asked them, like, would you be interested in participating with these students? And I got them on board. And what ultimately happened was they took the rainwater from that garage, routed it through vegetation into the landscaping next door, and cleaned all of that water and allowed it to infiltrate into the soil. And then we put up a bunch of educational signage and stuff as well. And it was right through like Amazon district downtown on Third Ave. And so it was
Oh,
like
yeah.
an opportunity for
Yeah.
public education as well. And so that was just kind of a cool
Nice.
partnership with a private developer, a building, and then a bunch of students just like raising innovation and kind of creativity around the idea, but also, communication with the public on what's possible. And so those were some of the cool projects that I got to work on.
Yeah, right on. I appreciate your work here. There's a lot to be done all over the country. So appreciate what you were doing here before you hit the road. And I want to pick your brain a little bit about that before we end up back in New Mexico where you are now, because that was something my wife and I talked around about as well too. Is like, let's just go do something. So like, where all did you go? You said you kind of traveled around, kind of living in forest for a while. What was your route, if you don't mind me? I'm just envious and curious.
Yeah, it was interesting. When we were in Seattle, we drove down the West Coast all the way to like San Diego area, and then we cut across through Arizona, Utah, Colorado, heading through those kind of the Rockies. But it was interesting. We got to the Four Corners where Arizona,
Yeah,
Nevada, and Colorado and New Mexico all join, or Utah rather, not Nevada. And we purposely avoided New Mexico because we thought we were going to come back. So we were like, I could have thrown a rock and hit New Mexico, but we like avoided it and went around. And then we ended up in Wisconsin, where my in-laws live, and we got married there during
nice.
COVID, which was very interesting. And then from there, we headed all the way.
Congratulations.
Thank you. From Wisconsin, we headed to Maine, and we did like upstate New York, Vermont, Maine, and then we went down the eastern seaboard, through Appalachia, basically, and then we headed back across the country. So we hit 26 states and ended up in New Mexico.
Wow.
It was quite the trip. It was really nice.
Yeah, this was van life or car camping, or what were you?
We were in my Subaru Forester, so it was a little tight, and
Forester.
we had our dog, but I had built out like a little like storage area / bed in the back,
Yeah.
and we had like a toolie, and we had our bikes and stuff. But we slept in the car a few times. It was a little tight. We mainly put up a tent, so it was fun.
I got a little Forester too. We put a little bed in the back of it and we used it once, and we're like, yeah, we're just going to put the tent up.
Yeah,
It's a little cramped back there. So
yeah.
that's awesome. With the 2 people and a dog like we've got as well, there's too much. So we do the tent. We're actually going this weekend out to Whidbey Island for a
Oh,
little
nice.
camping adventure out there this weekend. Looking forward to it. But what a trip you had! What an amazing experience! That sounds wonderful. I am definitely envious. So maybe someday we'll pack up when we decide it's time to leave Seattle. We'll do a nationwide road trip too. So well, all right. So you listen to a podcast while you're driving on the road, and you like what the guy had to say, and you end up in Taos, and you reach out to him. Who is this person, and what was he saying that attracted your attention?
So it was my now boss, Rachel Kahn. She has been the deputy director for Amigos Bravos since 2001. So she's been there for quite some time. And she was just talking about, resiliency and how drought conditions are impacting watersheds, and just the actions that they're taking through some of their wetland restoration, and water quality protections. And it just seemed to be like speaking my language. And one of the things that I was talking to my partner about when we got here was, this is a beautiful state. It's actually like I think the best state in the country. It's just absolutely stunning. Um, but I work on coastal wetlands, and we're not anywhere near coastal wetlands. So, that is my only hesitation. But from listening to Rachel and doing my research, I came to the conclusion that wetlands are just as critical in the watersheds of New Mexico and the arid Southwest. And a
Yeah.
lot of the design principles, are similar in the same way. And so it's a lot of like what I call green or natural infrastructure that we're trying to utilize in order to rebuild or reshape these these watersheds. And so it felt like an interesting transition where I could use what I'd been working on in a new light, in a new landscape. And so, yeah, I just started reaching out. Probably was a little annoying and persistent, because it was COVID and they weren't taking on new employees at the time. But like every quarter or so, I would reach out and be like, "Hey, I'm still here. I'm still very interested in wetlands." Um, yeah, I just kept knocking on that door.
Nice. Let me also say thank you for correcting me, because I think I used the he or him on the podcast, and it was actually her. So thank you
Yes,
for making, and I want to recognize Rachel and make sure I apologize for that. That was, oops.
totally understandable. Yeah.
Yeah. So uh, you use this term a couple times. Also, want to dig a little deeper and have you educate me and the audience as well. You've said green infrastructure, natural infrastructure a few times, and stuff that you studied here in the Seattle area, and how it's also relevant to riverine systems and semi-arid areas where you are now in the Southwest. So to a novice who doesn't maybe know what green infrastructure is, you really skillfully explained what blue carbon is. Can you tell us what green infrastructure is so people can associate that term and understand what you're referencing?
Yeah. So like the best way to think about it is like gray infrastructure is your traditional pipes and like roadways and things that we have built to manage water or other things in our built environment. And green infrastructure is, instead of using cement and pipes and all that kind of thing, it's using vegetation and soil. And so when we want water to stay on a landscape, and instead of having it convey off like on cement, for example, which makes it run and doesn't allow it to infiltrate, green infrastructure is soils and vegetation so that when the water falls, it's hitting a permeable surface and it's allowed to infiltrate into the ground. And so when we want to convey water, we normally have drainage pipes or cement or causeways or something like that. But we can also have like what we call bioswales, which are just cavities in the ground with soil and vegetation, and the water goes into that and is allowed to soak in, but also drain naturally towards our rivers. And the important thing about green infrastructure is it provides a lot of additional benefits than just like what we would think of with gray infrastructure. And so you're having soil and vegetation, which helps filter and clean the water as it hits the ground. It also helps with like urban heat island effect. And so, like, you can think of in our cities, it gets really hot with all the cement and asphalt. If we have a lot of trees and shading, it helps provide that cooling, provides habitat for pollinators, aquatic invertebrates, mammals, small mammals. And so all these additional benefits come with these type of design solutions, and they're often more cost effective than your traditional gray infrastructure kind of, large industrial type projects. And so it's something that we've been trying to build into our built environment, and it's the best way to help heal our environments, while providing all these additional kind of ecosystem services benefits that you don't get with like cement and asphalt.
Yeah. Thank you. That I appreciate that clarity and that explanation. And yeah, these what I've found in my career working in this area, the challenge is, or at least it has been in places where I've worked, is getting the local developers to want to do something different.
Yeah.
The 20th century way of developing with the gray infrastructure, with concrete, seeing rainfall as a waste product, and you just want to get it off your property as quickly as possible, with those hard surfaced parking lots and driveways and rooftops and everything, is changing the developer's mindset. And like, well, no, you can still develop this way and make money, right? We want, that's part of why people build things, is to sell it and make profit on it. So, but it can be more aesthetically pleasing with all these other multi-benefits, better for the ecosystem, better for the environment, better for quality of life for area residents. It has all these other benefits, but the developers, at least in the areas that I've often worked, they know how to make a profit doing it the way they've been doing it, and getting them to change their mindset is been a challenge in some of the places I've been. Have you experienced that same difficulty?
Yeah, I mean, in the organization I worked for in Seattle was called the 2030 District, and their whole mission was to change the hearts and minds, but also create an avenue where people that could break down those market barriers together. And so I see it as kind of, you have to have a carrot and a stick. You have to have building codes that demand certain levels of performance, but it's also nice to have an incentive carrot to push those developers or designers even further. Because, you can't set the milestone way out here because not everyone can get there right away, but incrementally, bring up those design standards and then put some carrots out there to really push innovation forward. And so you see some old school where, like in any kind of avenue of life, some people are like, change is hard and they don't want to change. And then you have your kind of better actors who are really pushing that envelope. And like, we see that in urban design now, we see it in more environmental design. And you really have folks that, see the value in these design solutions and have really pushed them a long way. But, what we've also seen is that nature always wins, and nature usually has the best solutions. And so that's why natural infrastructure and green infrastructure is so important. It's like, what we're really trying to do is just replicate what was there originally, because the natural way is going to be most effective. And so as we think about building resiliency and improving the health of watersheds, what we're really trying to do is like let the system revert back to its natural state, and that it will heal itself when left on its own. Sometimes it just needs a push, because we as humans and our activities on the landscape have degraded it. If we push it back towards its healing process, it will over time heal itself. And so that's why that whole idea of natural and green infrastructure is so important. And I think, why I really latched onto it is because, nature will win. And if we just help encourage it and be an active participant, we can achieve a lot.
Nice. Well, let's use that transition then, because I was thinking when sometimes it just needs a push, or we need a push, and that seems like what a connection I just made is like, well, I think he's working for an organization that is helping to do some of the pushing and some of the educating, and trying to get the community, the residents, the developers, the elected officials, get everybody kind of corralled and pushing them in the right direction. So I think that might be a way oversimplification of what it is that you do. But tell us a little bit about Amigos Bravos and some of the pushing that you're doing to try to get people to use nature and work with nature in a healthier way.
Yeah, so Amigos Bravos is a statewide nonprofit based in Taos, New Mexico. It's been working to protect and restore the waters of New Mexico since 1988. So we've been around for some time. The organization started based on the molybdenum mine, which is adjacent to us here in Taos in a town called Cuesta. Um, and it was this mine that had been, creating waste products for, a number of years, which had really killed the health of the local Red River. And so our organization sprung up basically trying to do restoration and reclamation of that mining site. And so mining, oil and gas kind of discharges and reclamation is still a large part of what we do. But since then, we've kind of evolved and added some more features to our organization. And so a lot of what we do now is restore headwater wetland systems. And we do that through low-tech process-based restoration. We do it through a lot of volunteer efforts, building simple kind of Bill Zedike structures, if people are familiar with him. And then we still do a lot of work around holding polluters accountable. So through the mining, oil and gas, things like that. We do a lot of work with water quality standards at the state level. And then we also do a lot of education and youth building. So we reintroduced the river otter to the Rio Grande. Right
Nice.
now, we're working on cohabitation and relocation of beaver throughout New Mexico. And
Nice.
we have also been doing water quality testing throughout New Mexico for the last 15 years, which is a really critical aspect of our work because we bring volunteers in, we show them how to do water quality sampling. And in the state of New Mexico, we only monitor our water once every 9 to 10 years. And as you can imagine, water quality can shift dramatically in that time frame.
Wow.
And so what Amigos does is we take samples 3 times a year, one in the spring, one in the summer, one in the fall, on rivers across the state. And we submit that data to our environment department. And so we're getting multiple samples every year on these streams. And that really helps with water quality aspects. And I'll get into it more, but we've done a lot of work around the Sackett decision, which, and that would be a topic that I think we can talk about as well. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me ask you about the topic that first brought you to my attention in the organization, and then we can eventually work our way to Sackett. But so, I mean, we're recording this in May. It's airing in June. I reached out to you probably in January-ish, early February-ish. I was reading articles about the end of the year, 2024 end of year success stories, things that we should be happy about with regards to environmental issues around the world. And I read an article that you were quoted in, and it was about, I'm just going to read the headline here real quick. New Mexico Water Board votes to protect 250 miles of river and stream segments from pollution. And the article, was talking about protecting portions of the Rio Grande, Rio Chama, the Cimarron, Pecos, and Jimenez river watersheds. And you were one of the folks quoted in there. So can you tell me a little bit about that success story, this 250 miles of river and stream segments that are protected?
Yeah. So outstanding national resource waters are the level of protection that we're talking about. And it is the highest level of protection under the Clean Water Act. And it's something that Amigos Bravos has been working on for a long time. And it basically is a nomination that prevents future degradation of that water quality. And so, especially in a time right now where we're experiencing the Sackett decision and reductions in jurisdictional geography for the Clean Water Act, this is an avenue to protect that water quality in the streams moving forward. And so it's something that requires a nomination and a petition to the Water Quality Control Commission, a hearing, and then, all this discovery and stuff. And so over the course of the last, I want to say 20 years, we have protected over 1,700 miles of river now in New Mexico and like 8,300 acres of wetlands. And so this was our latest petition. We did it in conjunction with the New Mexico Environment Department. It was one of the avenues that our current governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, tasked the Environment Department to do. And then Amigos Bravos and a coalition of partners worked hand in hand with the Environment Department to strengthen the petition as much as possible to add waters that we thought were critical. And then we ultimately got that success last December. So 250 miles were now protected. And so the water quality in those streams can no longer degrade in any way. And so it's just a level of protection that we find is critical for these streams, especially as it's the shifting dynamic of who's protecting waters in New Mexico. But it's also a way to really get the public engaged so that now they know that their local streams are protected. And we, as I mentioned, we do the water quality testing. So now we provide water quality samples on those streams. And so now we're over 1,700 miles of streams in New Mexico. It's something that, states across the country are trying to implement. I would say that New Mexico is the lead on this topic. We have definitely got the most number of streams protected. And so now it's, now that we have these levels of protection in place, now we're looking at, okay, how can we work with our federal partners, our local partners, our state partners to make sure that these streams are maintaining the water quality standards that they are supposed to.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that is a great success story. I'm the role that you and Amigos Bravos had on it, I'm sure was instrumental in kind of spearheading and pushing for this. Is that something that you worked personally on, or yeah?
Yeah, it was definitely a big thing on my plate for the last year. As I mentioned, we worked very closely with the Mexico Environment Department and their team, which a bunch of rock stars. Just want to say thank you to the Mexico Environment Department team. They really did a lot. But they came with a list, and they were using criteria 1 definition to nominate these waters. So it had to be within a wilderness, a state park, wild and scenic, wildlife refuge. And so it was like a very descriptive nomination criteria. And so we looked at all of the waters in the state that could fit that criteria. And then with our work through partnerships and stakeholder engagement, identified the ones that we should really be advocating for. And so we increased the number of waters that were included in that petition, and then really fought for them to stay in, because as opposition came up, other stakeholders who want these protections, got wind of it. They were advocating for the removal of certain streams. And we were really there to be like, no, this is the reason why. We have, thousands of community stakeholders in support of this. And it was really just demonstrating the widespread support across the state that appreciate clean water and want these levels of protections in place for their local waters, because they provide irrigation, drinking water, recreation, habitat, all of these critical functions for our communities. And so really demonstrating to the Water Quality Control Commission, to the Environment Department, to decision makers on this issue, like just the widespread level of support we had. It's almost hard to say no when the whole state's there being like, we want clean water. And so it was definitely a huge win. Like I said, this is, I think, our 6th version that we've done on this front. And we look to continue increasing these levels of protections across the state. And by increasing, I mean just adding new waters,
adding more to it. Yeah, that's so fantastic. Congratulations to you and the team. And I appreciate you recognizing and thanking the folks at the state as well. Public servants often get a bad rap, but they're incredible people doing real difficult work, and the constraints that they have put on them by policies and procedures and things that they don't have any control over. That's the realm of the elected officials. So really thank you as a public servant myself, working in the public sector, appreciate it when somebody recognizes that there are public servants out there also really working hard to do these, get these environmental wins also. So, but it does take, as you described as your scenario, it does take this coalition of nonprofits and residents and everyday people, as well as the elected officials, and but those elected officials, as you pointed out, like to listen when there's a groundswell of constituents and residents that are in favor of something. So it takes folks like you kind of going out there, educating people and rallying the public to get behind these things. So all around, congratulations to all of you. I mean, that's really a fantastic win for New Mexico, and a great example for other states to follow.
Thank you.
So you had some other wins. It sounds like we talked a little bit before the recording. We couldn't do this interview back in February because the New Mexico legislative session was going on, and you were real busy in that. So you asked if we could wait until session ended, and that's why we're here in May. But before we started recording this morning, you had mentioned you had some wins this session as well. So how'd it go? What happened this spring for you in your state session there?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I want to talk about is the state surface water permitting program. And so just backing up for context, 2 years ago, there was the Supreme Court decision, Sackett versus United States, and that reduced the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act, or waters of the United States, and it shifted it dramatically, and particularly in New Mexico. And up to 95% of our waters in New Mexico are no longer protected. And New Mexico was one of 3 states in the nation that didn't have a state surface water permitting program. And so we relied on the EPA to issue NIPDES permits and dredge and fill permits to protect our waters in New Mexico. Now, the EPA can only issue permits on waters of the United States. And so when Sackett happened, it just took away 95% of the jurisdiction. And so it's had a massive impact on New Mexico. And there was decisions before that. The Rapanos decision about 15 years ago also really started this trend. But Sackett was like one of the crushing blows for New Mexico.
Yeah.
And it's something that we at Amigos Bravos were extremely concerned about. A number of our partners were extremely concerned about. And the fact that we didn't have a state surface water permitting program left us extremely vulnerable. And so it's something that we've been working on. We were working on this before the Sackett decision, but when that came down, it really galvanized us and our partners. And so 2 sessions ago, we were able to secure a lot of funding to support the development of this program. But then this past year, in the legislative session that we just had, we were able to get 2 bills signed by the governor that created basically this state surface water permitting program for New Mexico. So it was 2 bills that got wrapped into one, but one bill basically gave us the authority to have primacy for waters of the United States in New Mexico. So taking that authority from the EPA and domiciling it in the state, and then also expanding that program to be able to do waters of the state, so the rest of the 95%. And so this was, we needed these 2 pieces of legislation to get through in order to set up this program. And so it was like critical that we get it through. For those that aren't aware, New Mexico has a very interesting legislative foundation or setup. And so we have a 60-day session followed by a 30-day session, and then a 60-day and a 30-day. And so it's a very short amount of time. And really, if you're trying to get these kind of policy legislation initiatives through, it really needs to take place in the 60-day session. And so if we weren't successful this year, it's almost like having to wait 2 years. And we already lost all these protections. The outstanding national resource waters are one way we can combat it, but it was incredibly important to get these pieces of legislation through this year. We had some really amazing legislative sponsors Senator Worth, Representative Ortez, and Senator Gonzalez. I want to give a shout out to those three. And then just a widespread coalition of partners that helped champion these through. And we were able to get them passed. And so now the Environment Department is going to stand up this program over the next year or two. And so eventually, a couple years down the road, once we have everything in place, we will be able to protect New Mexico's waters with New Mexico. We don't have to rely on out-of-state actors to protect our waters, which is incredible because the people living here know our watersheds the best, and we should be the ones that are protecting our waters. And so that was our big push, was just demonstrating that, trying to communicate that message that right now someone in Dallas is determining the water quality of New Mexico, and they probably haven't been here on the ground very often. They don't know these watersheds, and it should really be local New Mexicans who have the authority to regulate our water. And so it's a huge win for us. Now we are no longer one of 3 states that doesn't have this. And so it was a big win, especially in light of the federal uncertainty that is currently going on and the removal of protections for our environment.
Yeah, no doubt. Congratulations. That is a giant win. And also surprising to hear that you didn't have those kind of protections in place already. But again, congratulations on all the hard work of working with those legislators to get that passed. And just for the reference about Dallas, if people are wondering, well, why would somebody in Dallas? That's the regional. That's where the regional headquarters is for the EPA region that you're in, I'm assuming.
Exactly. Region 6 is headquartered in Dallas, and so that's where they are. And just one more thing to add is the reason why it was so impactful to New Mexico is because we're an arid state, and a lot of our streams, like perennial streams, are ones that flow all year round. We have a lot of intermittent and ephemeral streams, so those are only running when we have precipitation or snowmelt. And all of those intermittent and ephemeral streams aren't protected anymore under the Clean Water Act, and that is the vast majority of New Mexico's waterways. And so those are the streams that are above our communities, above our irrigation, our acequias. And so those are the streams that and ultimately all of those streams feed the main stem. So water quality across the board is impacted. And so that's really why we needed these protections in New Mexico, is because that's the vast majority of our watersheds.
Yeah. And that was the crux of that Sackett decision, that those intermittent streams were deemed no longer part of the waters of the U.S. So that really shook the water world and folks like you that work on water issues, not just in New Mexico, but across the country. I mean, the reverberations of that decision are still being felt in many places of how do you protect those intermittent streams and ephemeral streams, because they need protection.
Right.
So really congratulations, amazing work. That's a tremendous success story. Like those on the show, like telling people you can accomplish good things, it's not all doom and gloom. Like they're, you took this doom and gloom decision, the Sackett decision, that really altered the literal as well as metaphorical landscape of the country, and you guys built something that now has local controls in it, which is arguably going to be better for the systems anyway. Right. So that's fantastic. Before we transition into your call to action, are there any other big wins or any other things that you want to share about your work at Amigos Bravos that you want the audience to be aware of?
The one thing that I would like to mention is our Wetland Jewels program, which is something that I run or help run. And this is an avenue that we have built around wetlands in New Mexico, where we do high detailed GIS mapping, and we combine that with stakeholder input on what is valuable for them in their local watersheds. And through this process, we identify keystone wetlands within different landscapes in New Mexico. And that's how we prioritize our wetland restoration, is we try and target these kind of keystone wetlands that are providing a lot of ecosystem services benefits, in addition to water quality and quantity. And so we have 4 different versions of this. We're currently updating this page on our website, but if you go to our website, you can see these maps. And we think it's a really incredible tool for not only prioritizing restoration, but going after implementation funding and working with partners. It's a way that we advocate for protection with the Forest Service and BLM and other agencies for these watersheds. And that is really driving how we think about restoration in New Mexico. And so just want to advocate for people checking out the Wetland Jewels program.
Right on. And what's the website so people can get there?
So it's amigosbravos.org. And then we have some kind of toolbars at the top, one of which is watershed restoration. And it's one of our first things that you can flag. You can also reach out to me. I don't know if you're going to have my contact information, but it's just S as in Stephen, FRY at Amigos Bravos. And I'm happy to direct folks to the resources.
Perfect.
But
yeah,
that's how we're thinking about restoration in New Mexico. And a lot of it is these headwater kind of critical zones. And it drives a lot of our restoration. So just wanted to flag that as well.
Fantastic. Well, I'll definitely put the website and your contact information on the show notes of the podcast so people can reach out to you personally or visit the website and learn more about all the great stuff that you're doing there in New Mexico. So with that, Stephen, what's your call to action? Now you got me fired up. Hopefully the audience is fired up about what we can do to protect our local watersheds, whether they're coastal or semi-arid. I mean, there's wetlands work and water work to be done everywhere. So what do you want people to do with this information? How can they support you or support Amigos Bravos, or what's your call to action for folks?
Yeah. It probably seems, simple or straightforward, but like my call to action is really just get involved. Especially with, all this uncertainty that's going on at the federal level. Like, one response is almost like paralysis. Like you're just like numbed by all of this, what's going on, and it's just easier to disengage. But like paralysis is death. And like what we really need to do is engage at the local level. And so if this topic is interesting to you, I promise that it's not rocket science. A lot of what we're doing is built with hand tools and with volunteers and just being on the landscape and learning to read it and seeing where issues are arising. And so there are volunteer workshops all over all over New Mexico, all over the country. And so if this is something that you're interested in, I would just encourage you to reach out to local groups who are leading these efforts. And, we do a ton of volunteer workshops where, sometimes we're picking up trash, sometimes we're planting willows, sometimes we're building rock structures and streams. And, it's a day. Sometimes we do campouts. Sometimes it's a few hours. And it's just a way you get to learn a lot when you're participating in these workshops. I don't have an engineering degree, but like through being hands-on with a lot of these experiences, I've learned what we're doing and how to implement and things like that. And so it's not rocket science, and everyone can do this. And if you go and participate, you'll learn these skills and you'll be able to then apply them to other streams that you care about or your backyard. And so more than anything, it's be a local advocate and get involved in your local watersheds and just be aware of what's going on and try and make a little bit of difference yourself. And so that would be my call to action.
Perfect. I love that. I mean, that's, everything is local, and, getting involved, encouraging people to get involved. And I appreciate your, recognition that the times we're in are at best uncertain and a little challenging, and that can be overwhelming, and that taking that effort, taking that moment to center yourself and bring yourself into the moment and taking action to get engaged in your local community is so important right now. It's important all the time, but it's certainly a real critical aspect of the times that we're in right now. So I appreciate your call to action. And echo it and encourage folks to get involved in whatever they're passionate about in their local area. If they're water folks like you and me, then there's plenty for them to do wherever they're listening or watching this podcast. So get involved, get engaged. So Stephen, let me ask you then, we'll transition to the last few questions and about hope, since these are uncertain times, and there are some challenges that we're facing undoubtedly in our communities, in our country, and across the globe. There's definitely some big challenges that we all face. So I like asking folks about hope, and hope from the perspective not as a little fluffy emotion, but really as a mindset, as defined by those who study these kind of things. Hope is when you have a vision for a better future and you have some steps, a plan of action to take to get to that better future, and you have a sense of agency that you feel there's something you can do about it. Might not be able to do it all by yourself. You may need help. It may be difficult. You may fail, but you have a vision, you have a plan of action, and you have a sense of agency that you can effectuate some of that change. And the more you think that you have those things, the more hope you have. The less you think you have those things, the less hope you have. And we're trying to build some hope and encourage action on this show. So I want to talk to you about what makes you hopeful. So I'm going to ask you three questions. I would ask that you don't think too long about the questions. You just kind of give your first response and see where we end up. But my first question for you, Stephen, about hope is, what is your vision for a better future? That can be for you personally or professionally or for the world. Just what's your vision for a better future?
I think an active and involved community is one. I think in this day and age, it's so easy to hide behind our phones or not engage with folks who don't maybe think similar to us. And the hardest thing in the world to do is to change your mind and to admit it. And I think that is a problem with our society now. Everyone's afraid to change their mind because it may make them feel, I don't know, like they don't want to admit they were wrong. And so I think having impactful conversations where we admit that we're wrong and have the freedom to change our mind is how I think about it. And like connecting it to my work, in New Mexico, beavers have always been seen as a nuisance, and a lot of people just get them off my landscape type mentality. But we're starting to see the incredible benefit that they have to our ecosystems, especially in extending our hydrograph for ranchers and irrigators. And like the ranching and ag community has traditionally been opposed, but we're starting to see folks change their mind. And when they are the ones who are communicating this message, now it becomes even more impactful. And like now we're really seeing progress. And so that's like my hope, is that we take the time to think critically and take in information from new sources and give ourselves the ability to change our minds.
Perfect. You kind of already answered this second question, but I want to give you a chance to dive in a little bit deeper on it. So tell me why that's important to you.
So, I mean, as we all see in frustration, is like the status quo isn't working for most people. And that is why folks are getting so frustrated with how things are going right now, both socially, culturally, and environmentally, is like what's going on isn't working. And if we just try and maintain status quo, it's just going to continue to unravel. And so that's why it's important for me, is like we need to use the lessons that we've learned, traditional knowledge, ancestral knowledge, and involve it with current knowledge and chart a new way forward where it's beneficial for everyone. And the biggest thing there is like changing our minds and acknowledging that previous practices were not the best practices. And so like change is hard, as we talked about at the beginning of this episode. And the only way to really have change is to change your mind. And so that's why it's so important for me, is that, what's going on is not working for most of us. It's not working for the environment, surely. And if we don't change the way we're doing things, then it's only going to get worse for future generations. So that's why it's important for me.
Perfect. Love that. So last question then. Imagine for a moment that this future you just described, where people are having critical conversations, difficult conversations, but are opening their minds to other ideas, willing to acknowledge when they're wrong, and we're in a society that is developing new ideas and changing and growing. That everything you just described as a future, that's happening now. Imagine that's happening right now. How does that make you feel?
Elated. Um, you know, I think we're there. Like, I think that we're achieving critical mass, and that my hope is really in the youth and the next generation, because we see how like they're thinking about things now, and they're willing to push the envelope, and they're willing to break down these historical foundations, because it doesn't align with their principles. And so, like, my hope is that we're on the path, and that we're achieving critical mass, and that we are valuing environments for what they're actually doing for us, and like in the future you just described, that's what we're doing. We're evaluating and valuing ecosystem services for the benefits that they're providing, not only to us, but to our environment, to our wildlife. And so that just makes me so happy, knowing that like the values that we talked about with green infrastructure, on the additional value that they're bringing to our lives beyond great infrastructure, are now being recognized and are now being taken into account when we're thinking about these projects financially. Like, it's just like mind blowing for me. And so now it's like, these are no brainer solutions, because we're valuing what they actually do for us. And so in this world that we're talking about now, it's like everything's being thought of in this light. And I just see how our environments are going to respond to that, and the benefits that it's going to provide to us. And so that's just a really exciting future.
Yeah, right on. Well, I love all that, and I'm on board, and I'll be doing my part to make your future vision a reality. And I agree. I think we're reaching critical mass, and can't reach it quick enough. But it's because of work by you and others like you that we're getting there. So thank you for what you're doing to make the world a better place, in your little piece of heaven there in Taos. I appreciate your earlier message about you just find that passion, find that thing that makes meaning for your life, and dive into it, and make change there, and trust that your fellow human beings are going to be doing the same elsewhere, and we'll all get to a better future together. So thank you so much, Stephen, for being with me on Stories Sustain Us. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to reading more news stories about the great wins you guys are getting there in New Mexico. So I'll leave you with the last word.
I just want to thank you for what you're doing and helping to elevate these stories, and helping to select our story, and getting it out there in the world. We hope it has a positive impact on folks, and keep doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Right on. I wish you all the best. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. What an insightful and energizing conversation with Stephen Fry. Today we explored the critical importance of restoring watershed health, holding polluters accountable, and cultivating a strong water ethic for future generations. Stephen shared his journey from managing stormwater in Seattle to fighting for the rivers in New Mexico, to pushing for systemic change through community engagement and advocacy. His message was clear. Uncertain times demand engaged citizens, and we are most certainly in uncertain times. I really appreciate Stephen's powerful reminder that we can't sit back and let others decide the future for us. We each have a role to play, whether it's speaking up for clean water, advocating for stronger environmental protections, or simply learning to listen with open hearts while holding firm to our values. If you've ever felt like things aren't working out in our systems, you're certainly not alone, and you're not powerless. Now's the time to act. The world doesn't change by standing still. Like Stephen has demonstrated for us, uncertainty is not a reason for silence, it's a reason for action. So, take that first step. Use your voice. Call or write your elected officials. Show up to local meetings. Support clean water initiatives. Join a watershed group. Participate in a community cleanup. Whatever it is, just start, because the world needs your voice end your action. A big thank you to Stephen Fry for being here with us today and for his essential work protecting rivers, empowering communities, and building a better future for all. I want to thank Stephen for his dedication, which is truly making a difference. If you were inspired by Stephen's story, I hope you'll consider taking action in your own community. And if Stories Sustain Us moves you, please support the show. You can do so by subscribing, leaving a review, sharing it with a friend or family member, or visiting me at storiessustainus.com or on the show's socials. Every bit helps me keep telling the stories that inspire change. So I appreciate all your support. Be sure to join me next time as we travel from New Mexico to New York, where we stay focused on freshwater ecosystems. On June 17th, I'll be talking with an ecologist working on dam removal projects that are helping reverse centuries of ecological disruption. We'll explore how restoring rivers can lead to thriving, sustainable landscapes. You won't want to miss it, so you can catch the next episode of Stories Sustain Us on June 17th at storiesustainus.com, wherever you listen to podcasts, and on YouTube. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Keep doing your part to make this world a better place. Till next time, I'm Stephen Shower. Please take care of yourself and each other. Take care.